Some films from the 1960s didn't just shock audiences, they made governments nervous. Censors clipped reels, pulled posters, and in some cases banned the films outright. But why? Was it the gritty realism, the strange storytelling, or the uncomfortable truths they put on screen? Today we're diving headfirst into the titles that rattled the rulebooks across the globe. These are not just films, they're cinematic powder kegs, and once they went off, nothing was quite the same. Peeping Tom 1960. When Peeping Tom hit British theaters in 1960, critics didn't just dislike it, they tore it apart like it had committed a crime. Directed by Michael Powell, a man celebrated for lush, Technicolor classics, the film was a complete tonal U-turn. Instead of romance and sweeping landscapes, Powell gave audiences a color-drenched descent into the mind of a cameraman who kills women while filming their final moments. It was polished, disturbing, and entirely too real for the era. The main character, Mark Lewis, wasn't a mustache-twirling villain. He was quiet, almost polite, but completely consumed by his obsession. Audiences were forced to see everything through his lens, a perspective that was uncomfortably intimate. Powell's decision to make viewers complicit in the murders was decades ahead of its time, but in 1960, it was seen as crossing a line no one had asked to cross. Newspapers branded it sick and evil. Britain's once loyal Powell fans abandoned him overnight. The film was pulled from many UK cinemas within days, banned in several other countries, and Powell's career never fully recovered. Ironically, years later, directors like Martin Scorsese would hail it as a masterpiece that had simply been too bold for its time. Looking back, Peeping Tom wasn't the death of Powell's artistry. It was proof he was willing to gamble everything for a story. And that gamble, though it cost him then, carved his name deep into cinema history. The Naked Kiss, 1964. Samuel Fuller had a reputation for ignoring Hollywood's unwritten rules, and The Naked Kiss was one of his boldest acts of defiance. From its opening seconds, it set out to shock. Without warning, we're thrown into a scene of pure chaos. A woman savagely beating a man with her purse, then ripping off her wig to reveal a completely shaved head. No context, no explanation, just raw confrontation. That woman is Kelly, played by Constance Towers, and Fuller makes sure you'll never forget her. Kelly arrives in a small town determined to start fresh. She takes a job at a hospital for children and meets a wealthy man who seems like the perfect escape from her past. But Fuller doesn't deal in fairy tales. Just when it seems like redemption is within her grasp, she uncovers a disturbing truth that rips the story apart. From that moment, the tone shifts into something darker, more morally complex, and far less forgiving. The ending refuses to tidy up the mess. It's grim, unflinching, and designed to leave the audience unsettled. Censors didn't take kindly to that. In the UK, the British Board of Film Censors initially refused to grant the film a certificate at all, effectively banning it. Elsewhere, including parts of Europe and the US, theater owners were warned it might be too strong for certain audiences. Fuller, as always, didn't back down. He wanted viewers to feel every uncomfortable beat, to confront the ugliness beneath small-town respectability. He wasn't out to entertain so much as provoke, and that made The Naked Kiss radioactive for cautious distributors. Today, the film is celebrated as one of Fuller's masterpieces, a daring mix of pulp grit and unshakable moral conviction. But in 1964, it was a cinematic Molotov cocktail, and plenty of gatekeepers were determined to keep it from igniting. Victim 1961. In 1961 Britain, some subjects simply weren't spoken about on film. Victim, directed by Basil Dearden and starring Dirk Bogarde, took one of those subjects and put it under a harsh spotlight. The plot follows a respected lawyer who risks everything to stop a blackmail ring targeting people with hidden lives. What made it explosive was its direct acknowledgement of a social reality the government and media tried to ignore. Even without anything explicit on screen, the implication was enough to spark outrage. The British Board of Film Censors initially hesitated, eventually passing it with an X rating. Overseas, things got messier. The film was banned outright in several US cities and heavily cut in others. Censors claimed it was sympathetic to criminal behavior, simply because it portrayed its characters with empathy. Dirk Bogarde, one of the UK's biggest stars, took the role knowing it could wreck his career. Instead, it gave him one of his most powerful performances. Critics were split. Some called it a brave social statement, others accused it of pushing an agenda. In the decades since, Victim has been credited with helping to shift public perception, proving that cinema could influence social change. But in the early 60s, it was simply seen as dangerous, the kind of dangerous that got you banned. Shock Corridor, 1963. Samuel Fuller makes his second appearance on this list for a reason. Shock Corridor was his wild-eyed dive into the chaos of a mental institution, following an ambitious reporter who fakes a breakdown to investigate a murder inside the facility. What he finds isn't just the killer, it's a storm of paranoia, delusion, and the slow erosion of his own mind. Fuller shot it with the same unblinking eye that made The Naked Kiss so raw. The patients aren't presented as simple caricatures. They're tragic, unpredictable, sometimes terrifying. One claims to be a Civil War soldier, another believes he's a famous opera singer, and each encounter pushes the main character closer to the edge. By the time he discovers the truth, he's too far gone to escape with his sanity intact. The British Board of Film Censors initially refused to pass it, citing its disturbing psychological content and exploitation of mental illness. The film was also trimmed for release in some U.S. cities, where officials claimed it was unfit for public exhibition. Fuller dismissed those complaints, saying that if the truth about mental institutions made people uncomfortable, maybe they should be. Over time, Shock Corridor found its audience, especially among critics who praised its mix of pulp drama and social commentary. But in 1963, it was just too intense for the gatekeepers, and they made sure many audiences never saw it in its original form. The Trip, 1967. Roger Corman was no stranger to controversy, but The Trip was different. Written by Jack Nicholson, it followed a television commercial director, Peter Fonda, who takes a mind-altering substance for the first time and spirals into a kaleidoscopic journey. Corman used strobe lights, rapid cuts, and surreal imagery to capture the sensation, a technique that was both mesmerizing and disorienting. The British Board of Film Censors flat-out rejected it in 1968, refusing to grant a certificate until 2002. Their reasoning, it glamorized dangerous behavior and could influence impressionable viewers. Even in the US, some theater owners refused to screen it without local approval. Corman insisted the film wasn't an endorsement, but an exploration. That didn't matter to international censors, who saw its swirling colors and dreamy sequences as an invitation rather than a warning. The controversy only boosted its cult status, especially among counterculture audiences already hungry for stories that broke the mold. Viewed today, The Trip is a time capsule of late 60s experimentation, both in filmmaking and in challenging the rules of what could be shown. Back then, it was a red flag for authorities worldwide. The Wild One, 1967. Yes, The Wild One originally came out in 1954, but its impact roared into the 1960s because of the UK's long-standing ban. Starring Marlon Brando as a leather-clad biker gang leader, the film was loosely inspired by a real motorcycle rally that turned violent. The British Board of Film Censors banned it for over a decade, fearing it would inspire rowdy youth behavior and public disorder. When it finally premiered in the UK in 1967, it was already a legend. Teenagers who had grown up hearing about its ban rushed to see it, and Brando's sneering line, "What are you rebelling against?" became an anthem. Ironically, by then, the supposed threat had passed. The biker gangs of the 50s had given way to the mods and rockers of the 60s. The US never banned it, but even there, the film was controversial. Towns in the Midwest refused to screen it, and some theater owners faced local pushback. The UK ban had made it infamous abroad, transforming what could have been a modest rebel drama into a piece of pop culture mythology. The Wild One proved something important to both censors and filmmakers. Nothing draws a crowd faster than telling them they're not allowed to watch. Zulu, 1964. At first glance, Zulu looked like a classic big-screen war epic. Sweeping landscapes, a cast of hundreds, large-scale battle choreography, and a young Michael Caine in his first major role, sporting an officer's uniform and polished accent. But beneath the spectacle, this was a film that didn't sit comfortably with everyone, especially those in power in certain parts of the world. The story retells the 1879 Battle of Rorke's Drift, when a small British garrison of fewer than 150 men held off an army of several thousand Zulu warriors. In most war films of the era, the opposing force was treated as nameless and faceless. Zulu refused to do that. Instead, it portrayed the Zulu fighters as disciplined, intelligent, and tactically brilliant, not just an enemy, but a worthy one. This perspective clashed sharply with the apartheid-era South African government's propaganda, which depended on dehumanizing its black population. Authorities feared the film would inspire pride, solidarity, or even unrest, so they banned it for the majority of their citizens, specifically forbidding screenings for black audiences. White South Africans could watch it, black South Africans could not. Elsewhere, the film sparked other debates. Some critics accused it of glorifying British colonialism by framing the battle as a heroic last stand. Others argued it was unusually even-handed for its time, acknowledging the strength and skill of the Zulu army instead of reducing them to stereotypes. The battle sequences themselves were a feat of filmmaking. Hundreds of extras moved in precise formation, accompanied by a pounding score that built to near operatic intensity. The result was visually breathtaking, but also deeply tense, making the audience feel the weight of every moment before and during the clash. In the UK, Zulu was a box office success, but in South Africa, the band turned it into something more than just a war film. It became, unintentionally, a subtle act of defiance, proof that even in stories about conflict, respect for the other side could be just as threatening to an oppressive regime as open criticism. Women in Love, 1969. Ken Russell was never the type to play it safe, and his adaptation of D.H. Lawrence's Women in Love proved it. The story follows two sisters, Gudrun and Ursula, navigating love, ambition, and the messy entanglements of post-World War I England. Russell infused Lawrence's prose with his signature blend of lush cinematography, heightened emotion, and a willingness to sit in the uncomfortable spaces between people. Every scene feels deliberate, charged, and on the edge of boiling over. What turned this into a censorship flashpoint was a single, wordless scene between two male characters, Gerald, aka Oliver Reed, and Rupert, aka Alan Bates, sharing a moment of intimate physicality. In 1969, mainstream cinema had never shown anything like it. To some, it was an extraordinary depiction of male friendship and vulnerability. To others, it crossed a line. In South Africa and Singapore, censors cut the sequence entirely, with some screenings removing additional moments to soften the film's emotional bluntness. In certain territories, the scene was enough to trigger an outright ban. Even in the UK, the British Board of Film Censors debated at length over whether the film should be passed at all. In the end, it was released with an X rating, a move that only heightened audience curiosity. Far from sinking the film, the controversy propelled it into the spotlight. Glenda Jackson's fierce and layered performance as Gudrun earned her an Academy Award, and critics praised the film for treating adult relationships with complexity rather than reducing them to tidy resolutions. The uproar surrounding Women in Love wasn't just about one scene, it was about the shifting boundaries of what audiences could handle in a story about intimacy, passion, and the human need for connection. In the cultural collision that was the late 1960s, Russell's film stood firmly in the middle of the fight, daring viewers to confront emotions they might not have been ready to name. The Pawnbroker, 1964 U.S. Sidney Lumet's The Pawnbroker landed like a gut punch from its opening scene. Set in Harlem, it follows Saul Nazerman, a Holocaust survivor turned emotionally detached pawnbroker, played with unflinching intensity by Rod Steiger. Saul has built a wall so high around himself that nothing gets in. Not joy, not grief, not even basic human connection. His life is transactional, both in business and in emotion. What made the film a lightning rod for censors wasn't its subject matter, but its unvarnished realism. Lumet layered the present-day story with sudden, jarring flashbacks to Saul's past in a concentration camp. These sequences didn't ease the viewer in or out. They cut like a whip, slamming the horrors of memory against the grit of Harlem's streets. It was relentless, refusing to let audiences escape the weight of Saul's trauma. Internationally, some censors found the imagery too intense. In certain territories, entire flashbacks were removed, dulling the film's emotional impact but making it palatable for local boards. But in the US, the bigger uproar came from a brief yet groundbreaking moment that defied Hollywood's long-standing content restrictions under the production code. While fleeting, it was enough to make The Pawnbroker the first American film to receive an official exemption from the code's strict rules, a crack in the dam that would soon collapse entirely. Some critics praised its courage. Others argued it was too bleak for mainstream audiences. Yet the bans and cuts only added to its reputation. For those who saw it unaltered, it was a transformative piece of filmmaking that proved powerful drama didn't have to comfort the viewer. In the end, The Pawnbroker wasn't just another acclaimed drama, it was a turning point. It showed that the old censorship system could be challenged, and that truth, no matter how harsh, could be told without compromise. And once that door was pushed open, Hollywood would never close it again. The Caretaker, 1963. Harold Pinter's plays are legendary for their razor-sharp dialogue and quiet menace, and The Caretaker translated that unease perfectly to the screen. Directed by Clive Donner, the film tells the story of two brothers living in a dilapidated London flat who take in a drifter, played with unnerving precision by Donald Pleasance. What begins as a simple act of charity quickly twists into a tense psychological battle where alliances shift and trust evaporates. On the surface, it's a slow burn, no grand action sequences, no overt violence. But that's where its power lies. The tension builds in tiny, deliberate increments until even the pauses in conversation feel dangerous. Pleasance's drifter is unpredictable, sometimes pitiable, sometimes quietly manipulative, and the audience is never entirely sure what his true intentions are. The black and white cinematography traps the story in a world of shadows and crumbling walls. Every creak in the floorboards, every unspoken glance, feeds into the feeling that this small, airless space might collapse in on itself. Critics admired its precision and the way Pinter's dialogue kept the audience off balance. But for some international censors, that ambiguity was a problem. In certain markets, censors demanded edits, claiming the film's oppressive mood and psychological cruelty would unsettle general audiences. Others simply refused to approve it for release, unsure how to sell a movie that didn't deliver clear moral lines or an uplifting resolution. To them, the lack of answers was more disturbing than any physical threat. The restrictions undoubtedly hurt the film's box office potential at the time, yet in hindsight, those same qualities are what give The Caretaker its lasting bite. It proved that you don't need shock effects or spectacle to unnerve people, just the willingness to strip human interaction down to its rawest, most uncomfortable truths. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest battles aren't fought with weapons, but with words, silence, and the slow erosion of trust. Pressure Point, 1962. Pressure Point, directed by Hubert Cornfield and featuring a powerhouse performance from Sidney Poitier, was based on a true account from a prison psychiatrist. In the film, Poitier plays that psychiatrist, assigned to treat a young inmate whose deep-seated hatred and extremist beliefs have defined his life. The story unfolds through a series of flashbacks, revealing the prisoner's troubled childhood, formative experiences, and the roots of his worldview. What made the film so bold was its refusal to offer a neat solution. Instead of simplifying the problem into a morality tale, it confronted audiences with the uncomfortable reality that hatred doesn't vanish after a single revelation. Poitier's character, calm yet unyielding, tries to reach the prisoner not by lecturing, but by peeling back layers of pain, fear, and stubborn defiance. Internationally, the film ran headfirst into political walls. In apartheid-era South Africa, it was outright banned for one reason above all. It portrayed a black professional in a position of authority over a white man. This dynamic alone clashed directly with the government's racial policies. Across parts of Europe, officials ordered edits, claiming certain scenes were too politically charged and risked stirring unrest. In the US, critics were split. Many praised Pressure Point as an intelligent, fearless drama that tackled topics most studios wouldn't touch. Others complained it was too confrontational, arguing it risked alienating mainstream audiences. The bans and cuts meant Pressure Point never reached as wide an audience as it deserved. Yet in the long run, that may have worked in its favor. It became a film known not just for its gripping performances and sharp writing, but for its willingness to sit in the tension, to make people think hard about the walls, both literal and psychological, that keep us divided. The 1960s were supposed to be the decade when cinema broke free, and in many ways, it did. But as these films proved, breaking free didn't mean breaking through. Bans, cuts, and outraged headlines tried to shut them down, yet they're still here, still making people talk. Which one do you think deserved its ban the least? Drop your answer in the comments, hit subscribe, and keep digging into the movies that made the censors sweat, because that's where the real stories hide.